Tonight, we are going to talk about the mind that will not stop replaying. You know the one. The mind that waits until everything is quiet, until the lights are off and the house is still, and then begins its work. A conversation from this morning. A sentence you said 3 years ago. A decision you made so long ago that you can barely remember the room you were standing in. And yet, the feeling of it is as sharp tonight as it ever was. There was once an old Zen teacher who was asked by a student, "Why does the mind go back to the same places over and over?" And the teacher said something very simple. He said, "Because it has not yet been told that it is allowed to rest." Tonight, you are allowed to rest. Before we begin, I would love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight? And what time is it where you are? Feel free to share in the comments. And if these quiet stories help you find rest, a like or a subscribe means the world to this small channel. It helps others who cannot sleep find their way here too. Now, let us settle in together. These are not lessons to memorize. They are not rules to follow. They are not teachings you need to understand or remember by morning. They are simply stories, old and quiet and slow, offered the way a friend might offer a blanket on a cold night. You do not need to know anything about Buddhism to listen. You do not need to know anything at all. You only need to be here. And you already are. Tonight, we will spend some time with what the old Zen teachers called the replaying mind. The part of us that goes back again and again to moments already past, not because it wants to hurt us, but because it does not know what else to do with the things we have not yet made peace with. We will sit with people who have carried this same weight, a woman who could not stop hearing a conversation that ended months ago, a man who spent his whole life surrounded by ticking clocks and discovered something about time that no clock could teach, and others whose stories may feel, in some quiet way, like your own. The wisdom we will draw from tonight comes from the Zen tradition, a way of seeing the world that has been helping restless minds find ease for over 1,000 years. Not by fighting the restlessness, not by pushing the thoughts away, but by learning to sit with them the way you might sit with rain on a roof, knowing it will pass and that you do not need to stop it. You do not need to know anything about Zen. You do not need to know anything about Buddhism or meditation, or any of the names or words that might come up along the way. If a word in another language appears, it will be explained gently in beat words in the same breath. Nothing tonight requires study. Nothing requires effort. You are not here to learn, you are here to rest. And if something lands softly in you along the way, some image, some phrase, some quiet feeling that you carry into sleep, that is more than enough. So settle in now. Let your body find its weight against whatever is holding you. The mattress, the pillow, the blanket, pulled up to your chin. You have carried enough today. You have thought enough today. You have replayed enough today. Whatever the mind wants to revisit tonight, it can wait, or it can come along quietly if it likes. Either way, you are safe here. There is nowhere you need to go. There is nothing you need to figure out. There is only this voice, these stories, and the long, unhurried night ahead. And if at any point you drift, if you find yourself somewhere between waking and sleeping, between listening and letting go, that is perfectly fine. You do not need to stay awake for any of this. The stories will be here. They will keep going whether you are listening or not, the way a river keeps flowing, whether anyone is sitting on the bank. Let sleep come whenever it is ready. That is, after all, why we are here. Take a slow breath in and let it go. Feel your shoulders drop just a little. Feel the jaw soften. You do not need to hold anything right now. Thank you for joining us here at Moonlit Dharma. When you are ready, we will begin. There was a woman who knew this feeling well. The feeling of a mind that would not stop going back. She had been a teacher for 31 years. Elementary school. The kind of work where your voice is the first thing to wear out and the last thing to recover. She had retired 3 autumns ago, and the days since then had been quieter than she expected. Not unpleasantly quiet, just quiet in the way a room is quiet after everyone has left. You notice sounds you never noticed before. The tick of the hallway clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the way the wind sounds different when there is no one to talk over it. Her house sat at the edge of a small garden she had planted the year her husband passed. It was not a fancy garden, just some herbs, a few rows of flowers that came back on their own each spring, and a wooden bench she rarely sat on. The kitchen window looked out over it, and in the evenings, when the light turned amber and the shadows stretched long across the grass, she would stand at the sink and watch the garden without really seeing it. Her hands would be warm from the dishwater. The towel would be damp on her shoulder. And somewhere between the last dish and the drying of her hands, her mind would begin. It always started the same way. A sentence. One sentence, her daughter had said, the last time they spoke before she moved across the country. It was not a cruel sentence. It was not even an important one, really. Something about how the distance would be good for both of them. But the way she had said it, the pause before the word both, the slight shift in her eyes, and every night, standing at that window, the woman would replay it. She would hear the sentence again. She would try a different response, something warmer, something that might have made her daughter stay a moment longer on the phone. She would rewrite the conversation the way you might rewrite a letter, draft after draft, never quite getting it right. One evening, her neighbor came by, an older woman, perhaps 80, who lived alone in the house next door, and who had a way of saying very little that somehow said everything. They sat on the porch with 2 cups of tea, the garden darkening in front of them. I keep hearing it, the woman said. That last conversation. I keep going back to it. The neighbor held her cup with both hands, the way you hold something precious. Tell me, she said, when you go back to it, do you hear what she actually said? Or do you hear what you are afraid she meant? The woman opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. She had never thought about it that way before. Because those are 2 different things, the neighbor said gently. What she said was a sentence. What you hear every night is a story you are writing about that sentence. And you keep rewriting it because you are trying to make it come out differently. But it will never come out differently because it already happened. The sentence is finished. It is your story about it that has no ending. Then how do I stop? The neighbor smiled. You do not stop. You see, there is an old saying. The mind is hard to hold down, nimble, alighting wherever it likes. But a mind well tamed brings ease. And taming does not mean forcing it to be still. It means seeing what it is doing. That is all. Just seeing. And that is enough. Tonight it is. Tomorrow, you might need to see it again, and the night after that. But each time you see it, really see it, without trying to change it, the story gets a little lighter. Not because the story changes, because you change. You become the one who sees, instead of the one who is caught inside. The woman sat with this for a long time. The tea grew cold in her hands. The garden disappeared into darkness, and the first stars appeared above the old oak tree at the far end of the yard. The sentence came back, her daughter's voice, the pause before both, and for the first time she did not try to rewrite it. She heard it the way you hear the wind. It was there. It moved through her, and it kept going. She did not know if this was peace, but it was lighter than before. The light from the kitchen window fell across the porch in a long yellow rectangle. The neighbor's cup was empty, and somewhere in the dark garden, a single leaf let go of its branch and fell without making a sound. Tonight, if you are lying here and the mind is doing exactly this, going back to a conversation, a moment, a sentence someone said or did not say, you are not broken. You are not doing something wrong. The mind replays, not because it is failing you, but because it is trying to understand something it has not yet made peace with. It is reaching for resolution the only way it knows how, by going back to the beginning and trying again. An ancient text once described this beautifully. It said that the mind is like a monkey swinging through a forest, grabbing one branch, letting go, grabbing another, letting go, grabbing the next, never resting, never still. Not because the monkey is broken, not because the broken, but because that is simply what monkeys do. And the question the old teachers asked was not how to stop the monkey. The question was whether you need to swing with it. Perhaps tonight you do not. There is another story I would like to share with you now. One about a very different kind of mind. A slower mind. A mind that learned to rest, not by stopping, but by paying attention so closely to the present that the past simply had no room. In a narrow street, in an old part of a city, the kind of street where the buildings lean slightly toward each other, as if sharing a secret they have kept for centuries. There was a small shop where a man repaired clocks. He had been doing this work for more than 40 years. His hands, which had once been steady enough to thread a needle in dim light, now trembled slightly, the way a candle flame trembles when someone opens a door in another room. But they still knew their work. They still found the tiny screws, the hairspring coils, the wheels, no bigger than a child's fingernail. The shop smelled of metal and oil and something older. The wood of the shelves, perhaps, or the dust that had been settling since before he arrived. The light came from a single lamp on his workbench, and it made everything golden. The brass gears, the glass cases, the lenses of his magnifying glass, even the fine dust that floated in the air like snow that had forgotten how to fall. And everywhere there was the sound. Hundreds of clocks, each ticking at its own pace. Not in unison. That would have been too orderly, too mechanical. They ticked the way of forest sounds at night, layered, overlapping, alive. Some deep and slow like a heartbeat. Others light and quick, like fingertips tapping on glass. Together they made a kind of music that was not music. A rhythm that had no pattern and no ending. He lived alone above the shop, in two small rooms that smelled of the same oil and the same wood. His wife had passed 11 years ago. Quietly, in the autumn, the way a clock winds down, when no one remembers to wind it. He had grieved the way he did everything else. Slowly with his hands, letting the work carry what the words could not. In the months after, he repaired more clocks than he had in any year before. Not because there were more broken clocks in the world, because his hands needed to be busy, and his mind needed somewhere other than the past to go. He had come to this work as a young man, not because he loved clocks, but because he needed something to do with his hands. His mind, in those early years, had been a replaying mind. It went back constantly to choices made and not made, to roads taken and not taken, to conversations he wished he could live again. Some nights it would keep him awake for hours, turning over the same moments the way his fingers turned over the gears of a broken clock. But the clocks taught him something. Not all at once, not in a single moment of revelation. Slowly, the way water shapes stone. Not by force, but by showing up day after day in the same quiet place. What the clocks taught him was this: every second ends completely. The tick does not carry any memory of the tock that came before it. The tock does not anticipate the tick that comes after. Each one arrives fresh, lives for exactly its small moment, and then is gone, making room for the next. There is no replaying inside a clock. There is only now, now, now. Each now identical in its shape and entirely new in its arrival. He began to notice that when his hands were inside a clock, when his fingers were searching for the catch of a tiny spring, when his eyes were focused through the magnifying glass on a wheel the size of a lentil, his mind stopped going back, not because he forced it to stop, because there was no room for it. The present moment, when it is specific enough, when it is vivid enough, fills the mind the way water fills a glass. There is simply no space left for yesterday. An old Zen teacher named Shunryu Suzuki once said that in the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind there are few. The Clockmaker understood this without ever having read a word of Zen. Every morning, when he opened the shop and sat down at his bench, he tried to look at the clock in front of him as if he had never seen a clock before. Not as a mechanism he had repaired 10,000 times, but as something strange, something delicate, something worthy of the kind of attention that leaves no room for anything else. Some mornings it worked. The past went quiet, and the present filled him like light. Fills a room when you open the curtains. Other mornings, the replaying mind came early and stayed long, and his hands did their work while his thoughts traveled backwards through the years. He sometimes spoke to himself in the shop, not loudly, not with any urgency, but the way a man speaks when he has been alone, long enough that the sound of his own voice becomes a kind of company. "You are here," he would say quietly, bending over a stubborn mainspring. "You are here, not there." It was not a command, it was a reminder, the way you might tap a compass when the needle has drifted, gently, just enough to bring it back. But he had stopped fighting it. He simply picked up his tools and began, and sooner or later, sometimes after 10 minutes, sometimes after 2 hours, the ticking would reach him, the present would find him, and the past for a while would grow still. One afternoon, late in winter, he set down his magnifying glass and looked up from his bench. Through the shop window, he could see snow falling, large flakes, slow and patient, drifting down through the grey air as if they had nowhere in the world to be. He watched them for a long time. The clocks ticked behind him, each one counting its own quiet version of time. The snow fell in front of him, uncounted, unmeasured, free of any rhythm at all, and he sat between the two, between the measured time of the clocks and the unmeasured time of the snow. And for a long, soft moment, he was not a man with a past that needed replaying. He was simply a man watching snow fall in a shop full of ticking. Each flake caught the light from his lamp as it passed the window, glowing gold for half a second before disappearing into the street below. He did not try to hold any of them. He did not need to. There is an old story about a monkey in a forest, not a special forest, just an ordinary stretch of trees and branches, and the usual sounds of wind and leaves and distant birds. The monkey spent its days swinging from branch to branch. Grab one, hold it tight, let go, reach for the next. Grab, hold, let go. Grab, hold, let go. It moved through the canopy, the way some minds move through thoughts. Always reaching, always grasping, always letting go, only to grasp again. The monkey did not know why it kept swinging. It was not looking for a particular branch. There was no destination, no prize at the end of the forest. The motion itself had become the purpose, and the purpose had become so familiar that the monkey no longer questioned it. One evening, as the light grew amber and the forest grew quiet, the monkey grew tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from effort, but the deeper kind. The kind that comes from repetition, from doing the same thing so long that even the muscles begin to ask, why? It sat down on a thick branch near the middle of a tall tree and simply stopped. And something happened that the monkey did not expect. The branch held. It held without the monkey gripping it. It held without effort, without tension, without the monkey needing to do anything at all. The branch had always been there, solid and steady. The monkey had simply never sat still long enough to feel it. The branches did not need the monkey, and the monkey did not need the branches. It only needed to stop reaching long enough to discover that it was already held. Perhaps, right now, you might notice something similar. Perhaps the mind has been swinging tonight, reaching for one thought, holding it, letting go, reaching for another. And perhaps, just for this moment, it can sit down. Not because the thoughts are gone, but because you are tired of reaching. And because the branch beneath you, this bed, this breath, this moment has been holding you all along. What if the replaying is not a problem to solve? What if it is not a sign that something is wrong, but simply a visitor? An old, familiar visitor who arrives most evenings and sits in the same corner and tells the same stories in the same tired voice. You do not need to argue with the visitor. You do not need to show them the door. You do not even need to listen. You can simply notice that they are here. That way you notice the sound of a clock ticking in another room. Present, but not asking anything of you. The Zen teachers had a word for what the replaying mind does. They called it papancha, mental proliferation. It is what happens when a single thought begins to multiply. One thought becomes two, two become 10, 10 become 100. A single sentence your daughter said on the phone 3 months ago becomes an entire evening of rewriting, rethinking, reimagining every word. The thought itself is small, just a few words, just a pause, just a look. But the proliferation, the branching, the spinning, the reaching, from thought to thought to thought, that is what makes the night feel long. That is what makes the pillow feel hard. And the remedy, if you can call it that, is not to stop the first thought. You cannot stop the first thought. It arrives on its own, uninvited. The way a bird lands on a windowsill. The remedy is to notice the second thought, the one that reaches for the first and begins to spin a story around it. To see the moment when one thought extends a hand toward another, and to simply not take it, not because reaching is wrong, but because tonight you are tired and you are allowed to rest. Shunryu Suzuki, who spent most of his life helping restless people sit quietly with their own minds, once said something very simple about this. He said, "Let thoughts come and go. Just don't serve them tea." Tonight the thoughts may come. They probably will. Let them come and let them go. You do not need to entertain them. You do not need to offer them a chair or a conversation or a solution. They are only thoughts. Patterns of light and memory passing through a mind that is doing its best. And you are more than your thoughts. You have always been more than your thoughts. You are the one who notices them, and the one who notices is already at rest. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a slow breath in. Feel the weight of your body against whatever is holding you right now. Notice what has softened since we began. The shoulders, perhaps. The jaw. The space behind the eyes. Something in you has already begun to let go, even if you did not decide to let go. That is the body's wisdom. It does not need permission. It only needs time. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is something else the old teachers noticed about the replaying mind. Something that has to do with water, with rivers, with the way everything, if you let it, eventually moves on. There is something the old Zen teachers noticed about water. They noticed that a river never argues with what falls into it. A leaf lands on the surface, and the river does not stop to examine it, does not ask where it came from or what it means. It simply carries it forward. The leaf floats for a while, turning slowly in the current, and then it is gone, around a bend, beneath a bridge, into the wider water beyond. The river does not remember the leaf, and the leaf does not resist the river. Tonight, we are going to sit beside a different kind of water, and we are going to watch what happens when we stop reaching into the current to pull things back. There was a woman who lived in a house with a river behind it. Not a large river, just a quiet, narrow stretch of water that moved slowly through the trees at the edge of her yard. It had been there when she and her husband bought the house 40 years ago, and it had been there through everything that followed. The children, the noise, the years when the house was so full of life that she barely noticed the river at all. Now, the house was quiet. The children were grown and gone. Her husband had passed 5 years ago, gently, in the spring, when the dogwood was blooming outside the bedroom window, and her youngest, her daughter, had moved across the country 18 months ago for a job that sounded exciting when she described it, and far away when she did not. The woman had developed a habit. Every morning, she would carry her coffee to the small wooden dock at the back of the yard and sit there, watching the river. The air at that hour smelled of wet earth and wild grass, and something faintly sweet, the honeysuckle that grew along the fence, still half asleep in the early light. The mist would be low on the water, drifting in thin white ribbons that caught the first gold of sunrise and turned it soft and milky. She could hear the current, not loud, not rushing, just a steady, quiet pulling, the way breath sounds when someone is sleeping deeply beside you. Birds would begin one by one, as if they were taking turns. A wren first, then a cardinal, then something farther away she could never identify. It was beautiful, and she almost never saw it because every morning, within minutes of sitting down, her mind would leave the river. It would go to her daughter. Was she eating well? Was the apartment safe? Had she made friends? Real friends. The kind you can call at 2 in the morning when things fall apart. The woman would picture the apartment she had never visited. Imagining it small, imagining it cold, imagining her daughter sitting alone at a table, eating something from a container, and from there the thoughts would multiply. She would think about every conversation they had not had, every visit that had been postponed, every text message that was too short. She would sit on the dock with coffee growing cold in her hands and the river flowing right in front of her, and she would not see the river at all. She would see only the distance between herself and her daughter, and the distance felt like a river too, one she could not cross. One morning, an ordinary morning, no different from any other, something happened. It was not dramatic. It was not a revelation. It was just a leaf. A single yellow leaf curled slightly at the edges, fell from the maple tree above the dock, and landed on the surface of the water. She watched it. She did not mean to watch it. Her mind was already halfway to her daughter's apartment. But the leaf caught her eye, the way a movement catches your eye in a still room. It landed softly, without a splash, and the river took it, slowly, gently. The leaf turned once, twice, caught a small eddy near the bank, spun in a lazy circle, and then the current found it again and carried it forward. She watched it drift downstream, growing smaller, until it rounded the bend where the willows hung low and disappeared, and something in her chest shifted. Not broke, shifted, the way a window shifts when the wind changes direction. She thought, I have been sitting here every morning, trying to hold the water still, trying to reach into the current and pull my thoughts back, rearrange them, make them come out differently. But the river does not stop. It was never going to stop. And perhaps the thoughts do not need to stop either. Perhaps they only need somewhere to go. A Zen master named Dogen, who lived many centuries ago in a mountain monastery where the rivers were cold and fast, once wrote something that this woman would have understood, though she had never heard his name. He wrote, "To learn ourselves is to forget ourselves. To forget ourselves is to be experienced by the myriad things." What he meant, I think, is something close to what happened on that dock, when the woman stopped trying to control her thoughts, when she forgot, for just a moment, the project of managing her own mind. The world rushed in to fill the space. The river, the mist, the birds, the leaf, all of it had been there the whole time, waiting for her attention, the way a patient friend waits at a door they know will eventually open. She did not stop worrying about her daughter. That is not how worry works. You do not turn it off the way you turn off a faucet. But she began, very slowly, to notice when she was sitting on the dock and when she was somewhere else. And each time she noticed, each time she caught herself in the apartment she had never visited, rewriting conversations that had already ended. She would look at the river, not to distract herself, but to remind herself that things move, that thoughts, like leaves, like water, like the mist that burns off every morning and returns every night, they pass. They always pass. You do not need to chase them downstream. You do not need to hold them back. You only need to let them go, the way the river lets everything go. Not with effort, but with gravity. With the simple, ancient pull of moving forward. The mist lifted, the coffee was cold. The birds had moved on to their own concerns, and the woman sat on the dock, finally seeing the river, really seeing it. For the first time, in months, the water was brown and slow and ordinary. It was not trying to teach her anything. It was just water, doing what water does. And that was enough. Thich Nhat Hanh, a Zen teacher who spent much of his life helping people find their way back to the present moment, once offered this gentle observation. He said, "Each minute we spend worrying about the future and regretting the past is a minute we miss in our appointment with life." He did not say this as a scolding. He said it the way a friend might say, "You have been staring at your phone for an hour. Have you looked outside? The sunset is extraordinary tonight." It is not a correction. It is an invitation, an appointment with life. As if life itself has been waiting for you, patiently, without complaint, the way the river waited for the woman on the dock. Tonight, if you have been spending your minutes somewhere other than here, replaying a conversation, rehearsing a worry, traveling to a room you are not in, you have not missed anything that cannot be found again. The appointment is still open. It has always been open. You only need to arrive, and arriving is as simple as noticing the weight of your body right now, the sound of this voice right now, the breath moving in and out of you right now. That is the appointment. That is the river, and it's been flowing beneath you this whole time. There is something else about rivers that the old teachers love to point out. A river does not try to flow. It does not wake up in the morning and decide which direction to go. It does not plan its route, or worry about obstacles, or wonder whether it will reach the sea. It simply follows the lowest ground. It goes where gravity takes it. And by doing the least possible, by simply surrendering to the shape of the earth beneath it, it travels farther than anything that tries. A river does not fight the rocks in its path. It goes around them, sometimes over them, sometimes, given enough centuries, through them. But it never stops to argue. It never replays the encounter with the last rock, wondering if it should have gone left instead of right. It just keeps going. Not because it is brave or wise or enlightened, because that is what water does when you do not interfere with it. And perhaps that is what thoughts do too. When you do not interfere with them, they come, they flow, they pass. The only reason they stay, the only reason they pool and stagnate and grow heavy is because we build dams. We reach into the current and try to hold them. We say, "Wait, I need to look at this one more time. I need to understand it. I need to fix it." And the thought, which was trying to move on, stays. Because we asked it to stay. Because we are holding it with both hands and wondering why it will not leave. There was a man who understood this. Not because anyone taught him, but because he spent most of his life with his hands in the earth. He was a gardener, or rather, he had become a gardener, the way some people become gardeners, not by choice, but by necessity. His wife had loved the garden. It had been hers. The roses along the fence, the herbs in the stone bed by the kitchen door, the jasmine that climbed the trellis and filled the summer evenings with a sweetness so heavy you could almost hold it in your hands. She had known every plant by name, by season, by the particular angle of light it needed to thrive. He had known almost nothing. He had mowed the lawn and carried the heavy bags of soil and done whatever she pointed at, and that had been enough. When she died, the garden became his, not because he wanted it, but because no one else was there to tend it. And in those first months, he tended it the way he had grieved. Desperately, excessively, with the wild energy of someone trying to keep something alive that was slipping away. He watered too much. He fertilized too often. He staked every stem and covered every bud, and spent whole afternoons on his knees in the dirt, examining leaves for the smallest sign of decay. He was not gardening. He was holding on to the roses because she had planted them, holding on to the jasmine because it smelled like the evenings they had shared, holding on to everything with both hands, the way you hold on to someone's hand when you know they are about to leave. The garden did not respond well to this kind of love. The roses, overwatered, developed root rot. The herbs, over-fertilized, grew leggy and bitter. The jasmine, pruned too aggressively in his panic to keep it healthy, stopped blooming for an entire summer. He was doing everything he could think of, and the garden was dying anyway. Not because he was careless, but because he was holding too tightly, because he had not yet learned what every gardener eventually learns: that a garden is not something you control. It is something you participate in. The turning came on a November afternoon when he was raking leaves. There were so many of them, gold and rust and brown, covering every inch of the beds he had worked so hard to maintain. His first impulse was to clear them all, to bag them, to restore the garden to the neat, tended look his wife had kept. But his back was sore and the light was fading, and something in him, some quiet, tired part that had been holding on for 2 years, simply said, "Leave them." So he did. He left the leaves where they fell. He went inside, made tea, and sat at the kitchen table, looking out at the garden under its blanket of gold. And the next spring, something happened that he did not expect. The beds where the leaves had stayed were richer, softer, more alive than any bed he had ever tended. The leaves had broken down over the winter, feeding the soil, protecting the roots, doing exactly what they were meant to do, which was to fall and to let go and to become something new. An old Zen proverb says, "Knowledge is learning something every day. Wisdom is letting go of something every day." The gardener did not know this proverb, but his hands knew it. His soil knew it. The roses, which bloomed that spring more abundantly than they had in years, knew it in the way that all living things know the difference between being gripped and being held gently. He learned, over the seasons that followed, to let the garden teach him. When a plant died, he did not replace it immediately. He let the space sit empty for a while, the way you let a room sit quiet after someone leaves. Not because the emptiness is comfortable, but because it is honest. When the jasmine finally bloomed again, 2 summers later, he did not cut a single branch. He sat on the bench his wife had placed beneath it and breathed in the sweetness and let the tears come. And he did not try to stop those either. The garden became, without his planning it, a kind of practice, not a Buddhist practice. He would not have used that word, but a practice of letting go, of trusting that what needs to grow will grow, and what needs to fall will fall, and that the earth beneath it all is strong enough to hold whatever comes. His hands, rough from years of digging, learned to open, to set down, to trust the soil the way the river trusts the ground beneath it, not with understanding, but with surrender. One evening, late in the autumn of his 4th year alone, he sat on the bench with dirt still under his fingernails, and the last of the day's light turning the garden amber. The roses were bare, the jasmine was quiet, the herbs had gone to seed, and he realized, with a gentleness that surprised him, that he was not holding on anymore, not to the garden, not to her, not to the man he had been when she was alive. He was just sitting in a garden, in the last light, with dirt on his hands and nothing in them, and the garden held him the way it had always held everything, quietly, without asking anything in return. Tonight, perhaps you are holding something too, a thought, a worry, a memory that your hands keep reaching for, even though there is nothing left to grasp. And perhaps you have noticed, or perhaps you will notice now, that the holding is heavier than the thing itself. The thought is light. It is just a thought, but the grip, the way the mind wraps around it, examines it, refuses to set it down, that is what makes the night feel long. The Zen teachers had a word for this gripping. They called it upadana, clinging, not the dramatic kind of clinging, not the desperate grasping of someone hanging from a cliff. The quiet kind, the kind that happens so softly you do not even notice you are doing it. The way your hand closes around a worry, the way it might close around a stone in your pocket. Not because you chose to pick it up, but because it was there. And the hand does what hands do, and letting go, if you can let it happen tonight, does not mean throwing the stone away. It means opening the hand, just opening it, feeling the fingers uncurl, feeling the weight of the stone shift from held to resting. It is still there, you can see it, but it is no longer something you are carrying. It is something the hand is simply near. Perhaps right now there is something your hands can soften around. Not a stone, but a thought, a breath, a place in the body where the holding lives, the chest, perhaps, or the shoulders, or the space between the eyebrows where worry likes to gather. You do not need to release it. You only need to notice that you are holding it. And sometimes the noticing is the releasing. They are the same gesture, seen from different sides. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a slow breath. Feel whatever is beneath you. The weight of the blanket, the cool of the pillow, the quiet pressure of the mattress against your back. You are being held. You have been held this whole time, and you did not need to do anything to earn it. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is something else I would like to explore with you tonight. It has to do with the words we carry, the ones we said and wish we hadn't, and the ones we never said at all. The weight of words left unspoken, and the surprising peace that sometimes comes when we stop trying to say them. There is a particular kind of replaying that is heavier than most. It is not the replaying of arguments or mistakes or decisions gone wrong. It is the replaying of silence. The words you did not say, the things you meant to tell someone and never did. Not because you forgot, but because the moment passed, and then another moment passed, and then it was too late. Not too late in a dramatic way, just too late in the quiet, ordinary way that most things become too late. Slowly, without announcement, like a door that closes, so gently you do not hear the click. Tonight, we are going to sit with that weight, and we are going to see if it is as heavy as it feels. There was a woman who replayed one conversation more than any other. It was not a long conversation. It was not even an important one, by most measures. It was the last thing her husband had said to her before he died. They had been married for 41 years. He was a quiet man, the kind of quiet that is not empty but full, the way a deep well is full. He did not say much, but what he said tended to stay. She was the talker. She filled the kitchen with words, the way she filled it with the smell of cooking, generously, constantly, without thinking about it. Their evenings had a rhythm. She would cook, he would sit at the table with the newspaper, and they would talk, or rather, she would talk, and he would listen, and every now and then he would say something that made her stop stirring and look at him, because it was exactly right. The kitchen was small and old. The countertops were a pale green laminate that had been fashionable once, decades ago, and the cabinets were wood that had darkened with years of steam and oil. The overhead light had a slight flicker to it, not enough to fix, just enough to notice. On the wall above the stove hung a clock with a cracked face that still kept perfect time, and at the table there were 2 chairs, wooden, straight-backed, with cushions she had sewn herself from fabric left over from curtains she made when the children were small. The fabric had faded from burgundy to a soft, dusty rose. After he passed, one chair stayed empty. She could not bring herself to move it. She could not bring herself to sit in it either, so it stayed where it had always been, pulled slightly out from the table at the angle he preferred, as if he had just stepped away to wash his hands and would be back in a moment. Every evening she would sit in her chair with a cup of tea and look at his chair and replay the last conversation. It had happened on a Tuesday morning. He was putting on his coat, the grey one with the loose button she kept meaning to fix. She was in the kitchen, running water for the dishes, he said. From the hallway, "We need milk. I'll get some on the way back." That was it. We need milk. Those were the last words. Not, "I love you." Not, "Thank you for 41 years." Not any of the things she now wished she had said or wished he had said. Just milk. Just an ordinary sentence about an ordinary errand on an ordinary Tuesday morning that turned out to be the last morning. And every night, sitting at the table with the empty chair, she replayed it. She tried different endings. What if she had walked to the hallway and kissed him? What if she had said, "Wait, sit down for a minute. I want to tell you something." What if she had turned off the water and really looked at him? The way you look at someone when you know you might not see them again, except you never know that, do you? You never know which Tuesday is the last one. Thich Nhat Hanh, a teacher who understood loss the way gardeners understand seasons, once said, "The most precious gift we can offer anyone is our attention." And the woman, replaying that Tuesday morning for the 1,000th time, believed she had failed to give that gift. She believed she had let the most important moment of her life pass while she was running water for dishes. But here is what she had not yet seen, and it took a long time for her to see it. Not weeks or months, but years. It took the slow, patient work of grief, which is its own kind of teacher. What she eventually saw was this. She had given him her attention, not on that Tuesday morning. On that Tuesday morning, she was doing dishes. And that was fine, because they had 10,000 other Tuesday mornings. and most of them were ordinary too. She had given him her attention across 41 years of cooking his meals and sewing his cushions and laughing at his quiet jokes and waking up beside him and falling asleep beside him and choosing every single day to be in that kitchen, in that house, in that life. Every meal she had cooked was a sentence. Every button she had sewn was a word. Every evening at that table, with the flickering light and the cracked clock, had been a conversation. The longest, most patient conversation two people can have. And it did not need a dramatic ending. It did not need a final declaration. It was already complete. It had been complete for years. The last words were about milk. And that was not a failure. That was the purest proof of love she could have asked for. That after 41 years, they were still talking about ordinary things. Still assuming there would be a next time. Still living as if the days would keep coming. Because that is what love does. It does not prepare for endings. It prepares for more mornings. She sat at the table one evening, late in winter, with the tea growing cold and the clock ticking its cracked, faithful tick. The empty chair was still there. It would always be there, but for the first time, she did not try to fill the silence with a different ending. She just sat with it. The silence, the chair, the faded cushion, the memory of a man putting on a grey coat and saying something about milk. And she let it be what it was. Not a tragedy, but a Tuesday. The last of many Tuesdays, and every one of them had been enough. Her hands rested around the teacup. The warmth had almost gone. Outside, snow was beginning to fall. She could see it through the kitchen window, lit by the porch light, drifting down like something the sky was letting go of. Each flake appeared out of the darkness, caught the light for a moment, and then landed softly on the garden she could no longer see. She thought about how the snow did not choose where to fall. It did not aim for one spot or avoid another. It simply came down, and the ground received it, and by morning everything would be covered. The garden, the path, the bench where she sometimes sat in summer. Everything made quiet, everything made new. She did not move. She did not need to. If you are carrying words tonight, words you wish you had said to someone, or words you wish they had said to you, you are not alone in that carrying. Almost everyone, by a certain age, has a conversation they replay, a sentence left unfinished, a silence that grew too large to fill, and the weight of it can feel enormous, as if the unsaid words are heavier than anything you have ever spoken. But perhaps, and this is just a thought to rest beside, not a lesson to learn, perhaps the words were never as unsaid as you think. Perhaps you said them 1,000 times without opening your mouth, in the meals you cooked, in the doors you held open, in the phone calls you made even when you had nothing particular to say, in the simple act of showing up year after year in someone's life. Love has many languages, and most of them are quiet. There was a man who learnt this too, though he learned it differently. He was a father, not a young father. His children were grown, scattered across different cities, building lives he knew only through phone calls that came less often than he wished. He lived alone in the house where he had raised them, and the house still held their echoes. A mark on the door frame where he had measured their heights, a stain on the carpet from a spilled glass of juice that no one had ever quite gotten out, the creak of the third stair that his daughter used to skip over when she came home late. and did not want to be heard. Most evenings, he sat on the back porch. It was a wide wooden porch with a railing he had built himself. Steadier when his hands were steadier, and his back did not complain. The wood had silvered with weather. The boards had a slight give to them now, a softness that came from years of rain and sun, and the slow surrender of fibers to time. From the porch, he could see the yard, the oak tree his son had climbed, the fence his daughter had painted one summer in a color she called sunset and he called orange. Beyond the fence, the hills rolled away in gentle folds, turning gold in autumn and green in spring and blue in the long shadows of evening. He wanted to call his son. He had wanted to call his son for months, but every time he picked up the phone, his mind would begin its work. What would he say? How would he start? He replayed 1,000 versions of the conversation in his head. Some that started with an apology, some that started with a question, some that started with nothing at all, just breathing on the line, waiting for the other person to speak first. He had been a strict father, not cruel, never cruel, but firm in ways that he now wondered about. He had believed in discipline, in standards, in the kind of love that shows itself through expectation rather than tenderness. And he was not sure anymore that he had been right. The phone sat on the table beside his chair, and the evening light moved slowly across it, turning it from gray to gold. One afternoon, he picked it up. He did not plan what to say. He did not rehearse. He simply dialed the number and waited. His son answered on the 4th ring. "Hey, Dad," and the sound of his voice, so familiar and so far away, made the man's throat tighten in a way he had not expected. "I just wanted to call," he said, and then he did something he had never done before. He stopped talking. There was a silence, not the uncomfortable kind, or perhaps it was uncomfortable. At first, the way cold water is uncomfortable before your body adjusts. But he stayed in it. He did not fill it with advice or questions or the small corrections that had been his habit for 30 years. He just listened. He listened to his son's breathing. He listened to the faint sounds of his son's life. A television in another room, a dog barking, the clink of something being set down on a counter. And he realized that this was what he had been missing all along, not the words, the presence. The simple fact of being on the same line, breathing the same silence, connected by nothing more than the willingness to stay. His son said, after a while, "It's good to hear from you, Dad." And the man said, "It's good to hear you." That was all. They talked for a few more minutes. Small things, easy things, the weather, the dog, and then they said goodbye. And when the man set the phone down on the porch railing, the silence that followed was different from the silence that had come before. It was not heavy. It was not full of all the things he had not said. It was just quiet. The way a garden is quiet after the rain stops. Not empty, but washed. There is an old saying that has traveled through many traditions and many centuries. It says, "Silence is the language of God. All else is poor translation." The man on the porch would not have put it that way, but he understood it in his hands, in his chest, in the slow release of his shoulders. As the evening settled around him, he had spent months trying to find the right words, and the right words turned out to be no words at all. Just listening, just being there, just the sound of his son's breathing, and the knowledge that, for a few minutes at least, neither of them had needed to perform. The light was almost gone now. The oak tree was a dark shape against a darker sky. A single bird called from somewhere beyond the fence. A clear, falling note that hung in the air and then was gone. He sat on the porch with the phone beside him and his hands open in his lap. And he felt something he had not felt in a long time. Not forgiveness, exactly. Not resolution. Something smaller and maybe more important. Permission. Permission to be a father who had done his best and whose best had sometimes been clumsy and who was still here on this porch in this life with a phone that could ring again tomorrow. A Zen student once approached a teacher with a question that many of us carry in one form or another through our whole lives. The student said, "I have hurt someone I love. What should I say to them?" And the teacher was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that is not avoiding the question, but sitting inside it. Then the teacher said, "Before you speak to them, sit with your own pain first. Sit with it the way you would sit with a child who is crying. Not to stop the crying, but to let the child know it is not alone. When you have done that, when you have been with your own sorrow long enough that it no longer frightens you, then you will know what to say. Or you will know that nothing needs to be said. Either way, the sitting comes first." The student asked, "How long should I sit?" And the teacher said, "Until the question changes. Until it is no longer, 'What should I say?' but 'What does this person need?' And sometimes what they need is your silence. And sometimes what they need is for you to simply show up. The words, if they are needed, will find their own way. Tonight, if there are words you are carrying, words you have been rehearsing, rearranging, replaying in the dark, perhaps you can set them down for now. Not forever. Not because they do not matter, but because tonight is not for solving. Tonight is for resting. And the words will still be there in the morning if you need them. They will wait. Words are patient that way. The Zen teachers spoke often about right speech, va, ka, in the old language. And most people, when they hear right speech, think it means knowing the perfect thing to say. But the teachers meant something deeper. They meant that sometimes right speech is silence. Sometimes the most truthful thing you can offer is your quiet attention. Sometimes the most loving sentence is the one you do not say, because saying it would be for you, not for them. And knowing the difference between the two is its own kind of wisdom. Dogen, the great Zen master, once wrote, "Our practice is not to eliminate our delusion, but to see or become aware of the fact that we are deluded." And perhaps the delusion here, the gentle, understandable delusion, is the belief that the right words could have changed things. That if you had said, "I love you" one more time, or said it differently, or said it at the right moment, everything would have been different. But perhaps it would not have been different at all. Perhaps the love was already there, woven into the ordinary fabric of your days, and the only thing missing was your ability to see it. And perhaps right now, in this breath, between this inhale and this exhale, there is a small silence. And in that silence, nothing needs to be said. Nothing needs to be fixed. There is only the quiet space between two breaths. A space that has been there your whole life, waiting for you to notice it. It is not empty. It is full of everything you have ever meant but never found the words for. And it is enough. It has always been enough. Let us rest with that for a moment. Feel the breath move in, feel it move out. And in the space between, that brief soft pause, let the words rest too. They have been working hard. They deserve a night off day. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is something else I would like to explore with you. Something the old teachers knew about the body, about the way it holds what the mind cannot let go of, and about the quiet intelligence it has, this body of yours, that does not need words at all. There is something the mind forgets every night when it begins its replaying. It forgets the body. It forgets that while the mind is traveling backwards, revisiting old rooms, old conversations, old versions of yourself, the body has not moved. The body is here. It has always been here. It does not know how to be anywhere else. The mind can go to last Tuesday. The mind can go to 1987. The mind can go to a room on the other side of the world and sit down in a chair that no longer exists and have a conversation with someone who is no longer alive. The mind is a traveler. That is its gift and its burden. But the body, this body, your body, is only ever in one place. It is wherever you left it, on this bed, under these covers, with this breath moving in and out, whether you notice it or not. The body does not replay, it does not regret, it does not rehearse, it simply is. And tonight, that might be the most comforting thing about it. There is a tree. You may have passed it 100 times without noticing. Near a road somewhere in your memory. An old tree, wide-trunked, with roots that have lifted the sidewalk slightly on one side, and branches that have been cut back so many times they have learned to grow sideways instead of up. It is not a beautiful tree. It is not a famous tree. It is just a tree that has been standing in the same place for longer than anyone can remember. And here is what is remarkable about that tree. If you stop to think about it, it has no memory. Not in the way we mean when we say memory. It does not remember last winter's ice storm, though the scar on its eastern side tells the story. It does not remember the summer. The children hung a swing from its lowest branch, though the groove is still there in the bark. Its roots do not remember the drought of the year before last, though they grew deeper because of it. The tree does not replay. Its roots only know the soil they are touching right now. This mineral, this moisture, this temperature. Its leaves only know the light they are receiving right now. This angle, this intensity, this particular shade of afternoon. It grows not by remembering how it grew before, but by responding to what is happening in this moment. And by doing only that, by being only here, it has outlasted every storm, every drought, every winter that has ever come. Perhaps there is something in that for us. Not a lesson the tree is not trying to teach, but a reminder that the body, like the tree, has its own intelligence, and that intelligence does not require the past. There was a woman who discovered this at 2 o'clock in the morning, on a night when sleep had left her completely. She was not old, not young, somewhere in the middle years, the years when the body begins to speak in a language the mind does not yet understand. She had raised 2 children, both of them grown now and gone. She had worked for 27 years at a hospital, not as a doctor or a nurse, but in the billing department, a job that required a particular kind of patience that no one ever thanked her for. She had retired early, not because she wanted to, but because her back had asked her to, in the persistent, undeniable way that backs eventually ask. Her bedroom was small and familiar. She had slept in it for 19 years, and she knew it the way you know your own handwriting. without thinking about it. The ceiling fan turned slowly overhead, making a sound that was less a sound and more a presence, a soft, rhythmic whisper of air moving in a circle. Through the thin curtains, moonlight came in at an angle, casting a pale rectangle on the wall that moved imperceptibly as the hours passed, like a slow clock made of light. Outside, the summer night was alive, with insects, crickets mainly, and something else, something higher pitched and more intermittent, like a tiny bell being rung by someone who kept forgetting to ring it. The sheets were cotton, worn soft from years of washing. The pillow had a coolness to it that lasted exactly as long as she held still. The moment she shifted, the warmth caught up. The air was heavy with July, not hot enough for the air conditioner, but warm enough that the blanket lay folded at the foot of the bed, unused, a soft weight against her ankles, and her mind was running. It started with a bill she had forgotten to pay. From there, it went to her daughter. Had she sounded tired on the phone last week? Was she working too much? From there, it went to her own doctor's appointment next Thursday. The blood work, the numbers she did not understand, but that seemed to worry the doctor in a way that worried her more. From there, it went to the roof, which needed repair. From there to her mother, who was 87 now, and living alone and refusing to admit she needed help. From there to a conversation she had had with her sister 3 weeks ago that had ended badly. And from there to the question of whether she should call and apologize, even though she was not sure she had done anything wrong. Each thought arrived with its own small weight, and together they piled up like stones in her chest. She lay on her back, eyes open, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned its slow, patient circle. And she felt the familiar tightening, the jaw, the shoulders, the space behind her eyes where headaches liked to begin. She had a friend, an older woman, 70-something, who volunteered at the same food bank on Saturday mornings. They had talked about sleep once, over coffee in the parking lot after their shift. The friend had said something that seemed too simple to be useful at the time. She had said, "When the mind won't stop, I don't try to stop it. I just go somewhere it can't follow. I go to my hands. I go to my feet. I go to the feeling of the chair I'm sitting in. The mind can't replay what hasn't happened yet. And it can't replay what's happening right now. So I give it something that's happening right now. Something small, something the body can feel." The woman had nodded politely and changed the subject. But at 2 a.m, with the fan turning and the crickets singing and the list of worries growing longer with every breath, she remembered. And because she had nothing else to try, she tried it. She did not try to stop thinking. She did not tell herself to relax. She did not count sheep or visualize a beach or any of the things she had read about in magazines that never worked. She simply moved her attention, slowly, clumsily, the way you move through a dark room when you are not sure where the furniture is. From her thoughts to her hands. Her hands, they were lying at her sides, palms down on the cotton sheet. She noticed the texture of the fabric, the slight roughness of threads worn thin, the warmth where her skin had been resting. She noticed the weight of her hands, how they pressed into the mattress with a heaviness she had not been aware of. She noticed the spaces between her fingers and the air moving through those spaces, faintly cool. And for a moment, just a moment, the list stopped. Not because the worries went away, They were still there, hovering at the edge, waiting to rush back in. But for that one moment, the mind had somewhere else to be. It was in her hands. And her hands were here, and here was quiet. The body has its own way of knowing, a knowing that has little to do with logic, little to do with language, little to do with the endless sorting and categorizing that the mind does all day long. The body knows through sensation, through contact, through the simple, ancient language of touch and temperature and pressure and breath. And when the mind is lost, when it is spinning through its lists and its replays and its imagined catastrophes, the body is the anchor. Not because it is wise, in the way we usually mean wise, but because it is honest. It can only report what is actually happening. And what is actually happening right now is almost always quieter than what the mind says is happening. Thich Nhat Hanh once compared the breath to an anchor. He said, "Feelings come and go like clouds in a windy sky. Conscious breathing is my anchor." And this is what the old teachers meant when they spoke of kaya, the body, as the first foundation of mindfulness. In the Satipatthana, the Buddha's instructions for awareness, the body comes first, before feelings, before thoughts, before the elaborate mental constructions we spend most of our lives lost inside. The body comes first because the body is always first. It was here before the thoughts arrived, and it will be here after the thoughts have gone. It does not need to understand anything. It only needs to be felt. The woman in the bedroom discovered this, not as a theory, but as a sensation. She moved from her hands to her feet, noticing the sheet against her soles, the slight coolness of the air at the edge of the bed. She moved to her shoulders. Tight, she noticed, pulled up toward her ears as if bracing for something. She did not try to relax them, she just noticed. And the noticing, all by itself, was enough. The shoulders dropped, not because she told them to, but because the body, when it is seen, when it is acknowledged, releases what it has been holding the way a fist opens when you stop clenching it. Not with effort, with absence of effort. The fan turned overhead. The moonlight moved on the wall. The crickets continued their patient chorus, and somewhere between her feet and her shoulders, somewhere in the slow journey of attention, from one end of her body to the other, the list began to fade. Not disappear, fade. The way the stars fade when the sky begins to lighten. They are still there. They have not gone anywhere. But the light has changed, and they are no longer the brightest thing in the sky. She did not fall asleep immediately, but she stopped trying to fall asleep. And in that stopping, in that small surrender, the body found its own way down. The way water finds its way to the lowest ground, without force, without direction. Just the natural pull of something heavy being allowed, finally, to rest. There is another story that belongs here, one about a woman who found the present moment, not in a bed at 2 in the morning, but in a kitchen at 5. She was 73 years old, and she had been making bread every morning for longer than she could remember. Not because she needed to. The bakery down the street sold perfectly good bread for a reasonable price. She made it because her hands needed to make it, because the morning needed the rhythm of it, because the kitchen, before anyone else was awake, was the quietest place she knew, and the bread was the quietest thing she knew how to do. Her kitchen was small. The countertops were white tile, cracked in places, grouted and regrouted over the decades. The window above the sink faced east, and in winter the sun came through it, late and low, filling the room with a light that was more silver than gold. The oven was old, the kind with a dial that you had to know personally, the way you know a friend's moods, to get the temperature right. It ticked when it heated, a rapid, eager ticking that slowed as it reached its target, like a heartbeat settling after a climb. She would begin before the light. Flour from the bin, water from the tap. She always let it run for a moment, feeling the temperature change against her wrist, waiting for the warmth. Yeast from the jar, smelling faintly of something alive, something patient, something that had been waiting in the dark for exactly this moment. Salt, just a pinch, measured by the fingers that had measured it 10,000 times before. And then the kneading. This was where everything else stopped. Not because she decided to stop thinking. She had never been the kind of person who decided things like that. It happened on its own. The moment her hands entered the dough, the cool, sticky mass of it, resisting at first, then yielding, then pushing back, then yielding again, the mind went quiet. Not silent exactly, but quiet. The way a room is quiet when the television has been turned off, and you realize how loud it was only by the relief of its absence. A Zen teacher once said, "When walking, walk. When eating, eat." And this woman, who had never read a word of Zen, understood it every morning at 5 o'clock, when her hands were in the dough, when kneading, knead, when feeling the dough change beneath your palms, from rough to smooth, from stubborn to elastic, from something separate into something whole. Knead. There is no room for yesterday in kneading. There is no room for tomorrow. There is only the pressure, the give, the flour on your wrists, the warmth rising from the dough as the yeast begins its invisible work. She had a theory, though she would never have called it a theory, because she was not a woman who theorized. She would have called it a feeling. The feeling was this: the hands know things the mind does not. The hands know when the dough is ready, not by timer or by recipe, but by touch. The hands know the difference between dough that needs more water and dough that needs more time. And the hands know how to be here, in this moment, in a way that the mind has forgotten, because the hands cannot think about the past. They can only feel what they are touching, and what they are touching is always now. She would shape the loaves slowly, placing each one in its tin, with the care of someone setting a child down to sleep. Then she would slide them into the oven, close the door gently, and sit at the kitchen table to wait. This was her favorite part, not the kneading, not the shaping, but the waiting. Sitting with her hands on her lap, feeling the flour dry on her skin, smelling the first faint sweetness of bread beginning to bake, doing nothing, being nothing, just a woman in a kitchen waiting for bread. Her mind during these minutes was not empty. Thoughts came, memories, plans, the occasional worry, but they came the way birds come to a garden, landing, looking around, finding nothing to eat, and flying off again. She did not chase them. She did not argue with them. She just sat with her hands in her lap, palms up, open, like two small bowls that had been emptied and were content to be empty. The bread would rise. The kitchen would fill with warmth. The light would change from silver to gold. And she would still be sitting there, present, unhurried, complete. when the timer finally rang. Perhaps, right now, you can feel your own hands, wherever they are, resting on the blanket, curled against your chest, lying open at your sides. You do not need to move them. You do not need to do anything with them. Just notice them. Notice the temperature of the skin, the weight of the fingers, the small, quiet life in them. The pulse, perhaps, if you are still enough. Your hands have held so many things today. They have carried and typed and opened and closed and reached for things and let things go. And now they are resting. They are doing the one thing the mind cannot seem to do tonight. They are being still. And your shoulders, notice them. Are they pulled up, held tight, bracing for something that is not coming? They do not need to brace. Not tonight. Whatever the body is holding, whatever tension has gathered there, like weather gathering in a valley, it can soften. Not because you force it, because you see it, because you offer it the same quiet attention the bread maker offers her dough. And the body, like the dough, responds to gentleness. It always has. Let us stay here for a moment, in the body, in this breath, in this weight. The mind may wander. That is what minds do. But the body is here. The body will always be here, and you can return to it anytime. The way you return to a room you know well. Without thinking, without effort, just by walking through the door. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is something else the old teachers wanted us to see. Something about the stories we carry. Not the stories we are told, but the ones we tell ourselves. The ones we replay, not because they happened, but because we wrote them. And perhaps tonight, we can begin to see them for what they are. Not memories, but manuscripts. Drafts that we keep revising, hoping for a different ending. Not realizing that the pen has been in our hand all along. There is a difference between remembering and storytelling. Though the mind does not always know it, remembering is the simple act of a moment returning. A face, a sound, a feeling, arriving briefly, like a bird that lands and then lifts again. Storytelling is what happens next. Storytelling is when the mind takes that moment and begins to build around it. Adding meaning, adding motive, adding a beginning and a middle and an ending that may or may not have anything to do with what actually happened. And most of what we call replaying, if we are honest, is not remembering at all. It is storytelling. It is the mind doing what minds do, making sense of things, even when the sense it makes is the wrong one. There was a woman who had been telling herself a story for 20 years. She did not know it was a story. She thought it was a memory. She thought it was the truth. And the difference between those things, between what happened and what she believed happened, was the distance between a sleepless night and a peaceful one. She had been a nurse 31 years in a hospital, the kind of hospital that was always too full and too loud and too bright, where the coffee was never hot enough and the shifts were never short enough and the patients were never just patients, but entire lives arriving at the worst possible moment. She had been good at her work, not flashy, not the one they gave awards to, but steady, reliable, the one who noticed when a chart was wrong, when a medication looked different, when a patient's breathing had changed in a way that was too subtle for the monitors but not for her ears. She had retired at 62, not because she was ready, but because her body had made the decision for her. The knees, the back, the particular kind of exhaustion that does not go away with a weekend off. Her apartment was quiet. It was a ground floor unit in a building, surrounded by old maple trees. And in the afternoons, the sunlight came through the front window in long, warm columns that lit up the dust in the air and made the room look like something from a painting. She kept the curtains half drawn, not for privacy, but because she liked the way the light looked when it had to work a little to get in. The walls held photographs. Her children as babies, her parents on their wedding day, a group shot from the hospital Christmas party 15 years ago, where everyone was smiling, and no one knew yet what the next year would bring. She would sit in the armchair by the window most afternoons, with a cup of tea on the side table and a book she was not really reading in her lap. And every afternoon, without fail, the story would come back. It was about a patient, a man in his 60s who had come in one November evening with chest pain. She had done the intake, taken his vitals, noted everything. He had seemed stable. The numbers were not alarming. She had flagged the attending, as protocol required, and moved on to the next patient. 3 hours later, he coded. They revived him, but barely, and he spent 2 weeks in the ICU before being discharged. He survived. He went home. He was fine. But the story she told herself was not about his survival. The story she told herself was about the 3-hour gap, about the number she had written down that was slightly elevated, but not elevated enough to set off an alarm. About the moment when she had looked at his chart, hesitated, and then moved on. In her story, that hesitation was the failure. In her story, she had missed something. Something a better nurse would have caught. In her story, she was the kind of person who lets things slip through, who does not look closely enough, who moves on when she should have stayed. She had told this story to herself so many times that it had become smooth, like a stone tumbled in a river for years. She knew every turn of it. Every detail was fixed in place. The color of his hospital gown, the number on the chart, the sound of the code alarm 3 hours later. She could replay it in her sleep, and she often did. Then, one spring afternoon, an old friend visited. A woman she had worked with in the same unit for 15 years. Someone who had been there that November evening. They sat in the armchair, and the kitchen chair pulled close, drinking tea, talking about retirement, about their knees, about the strange silence of days without alarms. And somehow, the conversation turned to that patient. "I think about him sometimes," the woman said, and her friend looked at her, surprised. "Mr. November? The chest pain?" "Yes, why he went home. He was fine, because I missed something. I looked at his numbers, and I should have called the attending sooner. I hesitated." Her friend set her cup down slowly. "That is not what I remember," she said. The woman blinked. "What do you remember?" "I remember you being the one who flagged his case to begin with. No one else noticed the slight elevation. The attending was busy with 2 traumas. You walked down the hall and found him yourself. You insisted. And when the code happened, you were the one who started compressions before the team arrived." There was a long silence. The sunlight moved across the floor between them. "I do not remember it that way," the woman said. "I know," her friend said gently, "but I was there, and I have told this story too, to nursing students, as an example of how one person's vigilance can save a life. You did not miss anything. You caught something everyone else missed. And the 3-hour gap was not negligence. It was the gap between your assessment and when the situation changed. You could not have predicted that. No one could have. The woman sat very still. The tea grew cold. The light shifted, turning from gold to amber. She had been telling herself a story for 20 years. And the story was not a lie, exactly. It contained real details, real moments, a real patient. But it was arranged around a conclusion she had arrived at long before the story began. The conclusion was, I am not good enough. And every time she replayed it, the story confirmed what she already believed. The way a detective builds a case around a suspect they have already convicted. Pema Chodron, a Buddhist teacher who has spent much of her life helping people see through their own stories, once described this with a clarity that cuts through everything. She said, as we let go of our repetitive stories and fixed ideas about ourselves, particularly deep-seated feelings of I am not okay, the armor starts to fall apart, and we open into the spaciousness of our true nature, into who we really are beyond the transitory thoughts and emotions. The armor, that is what the story was. Not a memory, but armor, built piece by piece over 20 years, designed to protect her from something even more frightening than the idea of being negligent. The something more frightening was uncertainty, not knowing, the unbearable openness of saying, I did my best and I do not know if it was enough. The story, painful as it was easier than that openness. It gave her a role, the one who failed, and a role, even a painful one, is easier to carry than the formlessness of not knowing. What happened to that patient, in the end, was this. He went home. He lived another 14 years. He died of something entirely unrelated. The slight elevation on his chart, that November evening, was within acceptable range, as 3 different physicians confirmed in the review that followed. She had done nothing wrong. But the story did not care about reviews or physicians or acceptable ranges. The story cared about the feeling. The 3 a.m. feeling of a woman lying in bed, wondering if she is the kind of person who lets things fall through the cracks. There is an old Zen story that many people know, but few people hear. 2 monks were walking along a muddy road after a heavy rain. They came to a crossing where a young woman stood at the edge of a flooded stream, unable to cross without ruining her silk robes. The older monk, without a word, picked her up, carried her across, set her down on the other side, and continued walking. The younger monk was horrified. Their order forbade physical contact with women. He said nothing, but he stewed. He replayed the scene in his mind, the picking up, the carrying, the setting down, turning it over and over, examining it from every angle, each time finding new reasons to be shocked. Hours later, unable to contain himself any longer, the younger monk burst out. How could you carry that woman? You know, we are not permitted to touch women. The older monk looked at him calmly and said, I set her down at the river. You are still carrying her. The story is about carrying, not about what happened, but about the carrying of what happened. The older monk's action lasted 30 seconds. The younger monk's replaying of that action lasted hours, and the replaying was heavier than the woman had ever been. Pema Chodron noticed something else about this carrying, something that has to do with time. She observed that without words, without the repetitive thoughts, The emotions don't last longer than 1.5 minutes, 90 seconds. That is how long a feeling lasts in the body when the mind does not add a story to it. The flush of shame, the twist of regret, the heat of anger, they arrive, they peak, they fade. In 90 seconds, they are gone. It is only the story that keeps them alive. The replay, the narration, the mind saying, "Let me tell you again what happened, and let me tell you again what it means about who you are." Without that narration, the feeling rises and falls like a wave. With it, the feeling becomes a sea. There was another person who discovered this, a man who wrote about his life every night, and who learned, eventually, to stop. He had been a judge, not a famous one, a county judge, the kind who handles property disputes and custody cases and the small heartbreaking arguments that make up most of the law. He had been good at it, or so he believed, fair, thorough, careful with his words. But after he retired, the words turned inward. He began writing in a journal, and the journal became the place where the replaying lived. His study was a small room at the back of the house, with bookshelves floor to ceiling, and a desk that faced the window, but whose view he rarely noticed. The desk lamp cast a circle of warm light over his leather journal, a gift from his wife years ago, with pages that were thick and creamy and felt substantial under the pen. The pen itself was old, a fountain pen that required the particular patience of dipping and refilling, and the sound it made on the paper was a quiet scratching, like a small animal moving through dry leaves. The room smelled of books, that particular smell of paper and binding glue, and the faint mustiness of knowledge aging on shelves. Every evening, he would sit at this desk and write about his day, but the day would last only a paragraph. Then the pen would drift, backward, always backward, to the cases he had decided decades ago. The custody dispute in 1994, the property case in 2001, the sentencing in 2007 that he still was not sure about. He would write about the same events, the same decisions, the same moments of doubt. And each time he wrote them, they came out differently. The facts stayed the same, but the shape of them shifted. The emphasis, the framing, the conclusion. One evening, he noticed this. He had written about the 1994 custody case for perhaps the 50th time, and as he read back what he had written, he realized it bore almost no resemblance to what he had written about the same case 6 months earlier. The facts were identical, but the story was entirely different. In the earlier version, he had been thoughtful, weighing evidence carefully. In tonight's version, he had been hasty, influenced by bias he had not examined. Both versions felt true. Neither was the truth. He set the pen down slowly and looked at the journal, page after page of his own handwriting, his own thoughts, his own endless revisions of events that had ended long ago. And he understood something that changed the way he wrote from that night forward. He was not remembering, he was narrating, and the narrator, the voice in his head that decided what the facts meant, who was right, who was wrong, what should have been done differently. The narrator was not reliable. The narrator had an agenda. The narrator was always building a case, sometimes for his defense, sometimes for his prosecution, and the case changed depending on how he felt that night. On tired nights, the narrator was harsh. On good nights, the narrator was kind. But neither version was the truth. They were both stories. They were both drafts. Dogen, the great Zen teacher, once described meditation in a way that surprised many people. He said, "It was not thinking of good, not thinking of bad. It is not conscious endeavor. It is not introspection." What he meant, I think, is something the judge discovered at his desk. That the mind's habit of sorting everything into good and bad, right and wrong, success and failure, that habit is itself the problem. Not because sorting is wrong, but because the sorting never ends. Every sort leads to a resort. Every conclusion leads to a revision. And the revision leads to another revision. And the journal fills up with drafts that never become final. Because the narrator keeps changing the story. The judge made a decision. Not a dramatic one, just a quiet one, the way most real decisions are made. He turned to a fresh page, and instead of writing about the past, he wrote about today. What he had seen, what he had heard, the way the light had looked at 4 o'clock, coming through the study window at a low angle that turned the book's spines gold. The sound the neighbor's dog had made, barking at something only dogs can see. The taste of the coffee his wife had brought him, slightly too strong, the way she always made it. He wrote about what was true right now, not what the narrator said was true about 1994, not what the narrator said was true about his character. Just what was true in this room, at this desk, in this light. And for the first time in years, the journal did not feel heavy when he closed it. He capped the pen. He turned off the lamp. The room settled into the soft darkness of a house. At night, the creak of the roof, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the particular quality of silence that only comes when someone has stopped writing and started listening. He sat for a moment in the dark, hands resting on the closed journal, and felt something he could only describe as lightness. Not the lightness of having resolved anything, the lightness of having set the pen down. Tonight, as you lie here, you might notice the stories your mind is telling. Not memories, stories. The mind's drafts, its revisions, its endless attempts to make sense of things that may not need making sense of. And you might notice, if you are very gentle with yourself, that the stories change. That the version you told yourself this morning is not quite the same as the version you are telling yourself right now. And that neither of them is the truth. They are just stories. Drafts, words on a page that has not yet been closed. The Zen teachers had a word for what the mind does when it encounters an experience. Sanya, perception, not the experience itself, but the mind's impression of it. The filter, the lens, the narrator's voice. Sanya is not lying to you. It is just not telling the whole truth. It is telling the part of the truth that fits the story it has already decided to tell. And when you see this, really see it. The way the nurse finally saw her own story, when her friend told a different version, something relaxes. Not because the past changes, but because you realize that the story about the past is just a story. And stories can be set down. Thich Nhat Hanh said it simply. To dwell in the here and now does not mean you never think about the past. The idea is simply not to allow yourself to get lost in regrets about the past. Not lost. You are allowed to visit. You are allowed to remember. You are allowed to feel whatever the memory brings. But you do not have to live there. You do not have to build a house in the past and furnish it with stories and move in and never come back. Tonight, you are here, in this bed, in this breath, and the stories, all of them, the ones you have been telling yourself for years, the ones you revised just this evening. They can rest. They do not need another draft tonight. The narrator can put the pen down, the page can stay blank, and the silence that follows is not emptiness, it is space. Space for something other than the same story told the same way one more time. Let us rest in that space for a moment. Take a breath, feel it fill you, feel it leave, and in the leaving, let the stories go with it. Just for now, they will come back. Stories always come back, but right now in this breath, they are not here, and you are. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is one more thing I would like to share with you tonight. One more thread in this tapestry of rest. It has to do with forgiveness. Not the grand, dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The kind that happens when you are too tired to hold on any longer, and the hands simply open. Forgiveness is a word people use as if it were simple, as if you could decide to do it the way you decide to turn off a light. One motion, one click, and the room goes dark. But anyone who has ever needed to forgive knows that it does not work that way. Forgiveness is not a decision. It is a process. And sometimes it is not even a process, it is just a weariness. A moment when you have been carrying something for so long that your arms simply give out and the thing falls. And you stand there with empty hands wondering why you held on so long. Tonight, we are going to sit with that kind of forgiveness. The quiet kind. The kind that comes not from strength, but from exhaustion. And we are going to see if, perhaps, that is the truest kind there is. There was a woman who had been carrying a grudge for 30 years. She did not call it a grudge. She called it a wound. She called it the truth. She called it the thing her sister had done that could not be undone. And for 30 years, she had replayed it. The argument, the accusation, the door that closed too hard, the silence that followed and never fully lifted. She was 65 now. Her parents had both passed. Her father first, quietly, in a hospital bed surrounded by machines that beeped in rhythms no one understood. And her mother, 3 years later, at home, in the chair by the window where she had spent most of her last decade, watching the street as if expecting someone to arrive. The house they had lived in, the house where the argument had happened, the house where the door had slammed, the house that held more memories than its walls could reasonably contain, was now empty, and it was her job to clean it out. She arrived on a Thursday morning, in late October. The front door stuck the way it always had. You had to lift the handle slightly while pushing, a trick she had known since she was 12, but that still caught her off guard every time. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of a house that had been closed too long, dust and old carpet, and something faintly sweet, like fruit that had passed its season. The hallway was narrow. The wallpaper, a pattern of small flowers her mother had chosen in 1978, was peeling slightly near the ceiling. The floorboards creaked in the places they had always creaked, and the creak sounded different now, without furniture to absorb it. Louder, more honest. The sound of a house admitting it was old. She had brought boxes, flat cardboard boxes from the hardware store, unfolded and stacked in the trunk of her car, along with packing tape and a roll of labels she would never use. She had planned to be efficient, to move through the rooms systematically. Bedroom first, then the living room, then the kitchen, then the basement that everyone had always avoided because of the spiders and the strange smell near the water heater. She started in her parents' bedroom. Their closet still held her father's shirts. White button-downs he had worn to work for 40 years, each one nearly identical, hung in a row like a choir waiting to sing. Her mother's dresses were on the other side, arranged by color in a way that was so perfectly her mother that the woman had to stop and press her hand against the doorframe and breathe. It was in the closet, on the top shelf, behind a box of Christmas ornaments wrapped in tissue paper that had not been opened since 2009, that she found the letter. It was her sister's handwriting. She knew it instantly. The sharp, leftward lean, the way the letters crowded together as if they were cold and huddling for warmth. The envelope was not sealed. Inside, a single page, dated 3 years after the argument. Her sister had written to their mother. She had not written to her. She read the letter, standing in the closet, with the smell of her father's shirts, and the faint lavender of her mother's sachet, and the dust of years rising around her. The letter said things she had not expected. It said, "I am sorry." It said, "I do not know how to fix this." It said, "I think about her every day, and I do not know how to reach her." And the woman felt something crack inside her chest. Not break, crack, the way ice cracks on a lake when the first warmth of spring touches it. Not shattering, not dramatic, just a quiet sound, barely audible. That means something underneath is beginning to move. She had spent 30 years telling herself a story about her sister. A story in which her sister was the one who had walked away, the one who had chosen silence, the one who did not care enough to try. And here, in the closet of a house that smelled like dust and old flowers, was evidence that the story was not the whole truth. That her sister had tried, not with her, but with their mother. That the door had not been closed as permanently as she had believed. That the silence had been shared, not imposed. There is an old teaching in the Buddhist tradition that describes anger and resentment with an image so simple it is almost impossible to argue with. It says, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. The woman had heard this before, in one form or another. It had seemed like a nice idea. But standing in that closet, with the letter in her hand and 30 years of heat in her palm, she understood it differently. She was not holding a coal to throw it. She had forgotten she was holding it at all. The heat had become so familiar that she no longer recognized it as burning. It was just the temperature of her hand. It was just what holding felt like. She did not forgive her sister in that moment. Forgiveness is not a moment. But she did something smaller and perhaps more important. She folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and put the envelope in the box with the Christmas ornaments. She closed the box. She sealed it with tape, and she carried it downstairs with the rest of the things that were leaving this house. She did not throw the letter away. She did not call her sister. She did not resolve anything. She simply chose, for the first time in 30 years, to put it down. Not to forgive, not to forget, just to stop holding, to let the coal rest on the ground, where it could cool on its own, in its own time, without her hand wrapped around it. The afternoon light came through the dirty windows in long, pale shafts, and the dust she had raised from the closet floated in the light like tiny, weightless things that had finally been given permission to drift. She stood in the empty bedroom and breathed. The air tasted like endings, but not only endings, like the space that comes after. If you are carrying someone else's name tonight, If there is a person whose face appears in your replaying, whose words you hear when the house is quiet, whose absence or presence has become a weight you carry without thinking about it, you are not wrong to carry it. You are not weak for holding on. The carrying is human. The holding is love in its most exhausted form. But perhaps tonight, just tonight, you can set it down. Not forever, not as a grand gesture, just the way you set down a heavy bag when you finally reach the door. You will pick it up again if you need to. But for now, your arms need rest. And rest is allowed. There was another woman who learned about forgiveness. Though she would not have used that word, she would have said she learned about clay. She was a potter. She had been a potter for most of her life, since her 20s, when she had wandered into a ceramic studio on a rainy afternoon and put her hands in wet clay for the first time, and felt something she could only describe as recognition, as if her hands had been waiting for this material their whole lives and had finally found it. Her workshop was a small building behind her house, with a concrete floor stained by decades of slip and glaze, and windows that faced east, so the morning light came in early and strong. The wheel sat in the center, and around it, on shelves, on tables, on the floor, sat the evidence of her work. Bowls and cups and vases in various stages of completion. Some still wet and grey, others dried to a pale bone color, others glazed and gleaming with colors. She had mixed herself from recipes. She kept in a notebook so stained, it was nearly illegible. She was 70 now. Her children, 3 of them, all grown, all far away, called on Sundays sometimes. The calls were warm but careful, the way calls become when there is history that no one quite knows how to discuss. She had been a strict mother, not cold, never cold, but firm in ways that she now questioned. She had believed in early bedtimes and finished plates and homework before television and consequences that were swift and non-negotiable. She had believed that love and discipline were the same thing, or close enough that the difference did not matter. Now, alone in her workshop at 5 in the morning, with the wheel spinning and the clay cold under her palms, she was not so sure. The replaying mind showed her scenes she wished she could reshoot. Her daughter's face at 12, caught between defiance and tears, when she had said something about the girl's friends that was true but should not have been said. Her son at 16 leaving the dinner table in silence after she had criticized his grades in front of his grandmother. Small moments, not abuse, never abuse, but the particular kind of sharpness that a conscientious mother mistakes for love, and that a child mistakes for rejection, and that both of them carry for decades without knowing the other is carrying it too. The clay taught her something about this. Every morning, when she began a new piece, she would take a lump of clay and begin to center it on the wheel. Centering requires 2 opposing forces, the push inward and the resistance outward. If you push too hard, the clay collapses. If you do not push hard enough, it wobbles and flies off. The secret is in the balance. The secret is in knowing when to press and when to ease, when to hold and when to let the clay find its own shape. She had not found that balance with her children. She had pushed too hard, and some things had collapsed. Not irreparably. They still called, they still visited at Christmas. They still loved her in the complicated way that adult children love their imperfect parents. But there were dents, There were marks, and she replayed them every morning while the clay spun beneath her hands. Thich Nhat Hanh once said, "Letting go gives us freedom, and freedom is the only condition for happiness." And the potter heard this not as philosophy but as instruction, the same kind of instruction the clay gave her every day. Letting go does not mean not caring. Letting go means opening the hands, letting the clay be what it wants to be, not what you decided it should be before you even sat down at the wheel. She began to apply this to the replaying, not all at once. She was not a woman who did anything all at once, but gradually, the way a pot takes shape. When the memory of her daughter's face came, the 12-year-old face, the tears, she did not push it away. She did not argue with it. She did not defend herself, or explain herself, or rewrite the scene with a gentler version of herself. She just let it be there, the way a flaw in a pot is there, visible, undeniable, part of the piece. And she kept working. She kept spinning the wheel. She kept her hands on the clay, and the flaw became part of the shape. Not a defect, but a feature. Not something to fix, but something to include. One morning, she finished a bowl that was not symmetrical. One side was slightly higher than the other, and there was a thumb print near the rim where she had pressed too hard. She almost recycled the clay. She had recycled 1,000 imperfect bowls before. But she stopped. She looked at it. The asymmetry gave it character. The thumbprint gave it proof that a human hand had been here. It was not a perfect bowl, but it was an honest one, and there was a kind of beauty in its honesty that a perfect bowl could never have. She set it on the shelf to dry, and as she sat in her chair by the window, waiting for the kiln to heat, she rested her hands on her lap, palms up, open, dusted with dried clay, and she felt something ease in her chest. She had not forgiven herself exactly. She did not know if that was what this was, but she had stopped trying to fix the bowl of her past. She had stopped trying to make it symmetrical. She had left the thumbprint where it was, and the bowl, imperfect and uneven and marked by her own hand, was beautiful. There is an old image that appears in many Buddhist teachings. It is the image of a person holding a hot coal. The original teaching says that holding anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it somewhere else. You are the one who gets burned. But there is a quieter version of this story that is less often told. In this version, the person has been holding the coal for so long that they have forgotten what their hand felt like before. The heat has become normal. The burning has become the baseline. They do not even remember who they were planning to throw it at. They just hold. Because holding is what they have always done. Because opening the hand after so many years feels more frightening than the burning. And forgiveness, the real kind, the kind that happens at 3 a.m. when no one is watching, is simply the moment when the hand opens. Not because you decided to forgive, not because you understand or approve or agree, but because the muscles are tired, because the heat is too much, because the body, which has its own wisdom, its own clock, its own patience, finally says, enough, and the coal falls, and the hand opens, and the air touches the burns. And it stings terribly, because the air is honest in a way the heat was not. But it also begins to cool, and cooling is the beginning of healing. And healing is the beginning of rest. Thich Nhat Hanh described the replaying mind with an image that belongs here. At the end of this thread, he said, We ruminate on suffering, regret, and sorrow. We chew on them, swallow them, bring them back up, and eat them again and again. This is what the replaying does with resentment. It feeds on it, not because it is cruel, but because it does not know what else to do with undigested pain. The mind chews because the heart has not yet swallowed, and swallowing, truly letting the thing pass through you and become part of your life instead of sitting forever in your throat. That is forgiveness. Not a decision, a digestion. The Zen teachers spoke of a quality called kanti, patience. But they did not mean patience with others. They meant patience with yourself. The kind of patience that says, I did the best I could with what I knew, and what I knew was not enough. And that is not a failure. That is being human. Kanti is the patience to sit with your own imperfection, the way the potter sat with her imperfect bowl. Not trying to fix it, not trying to hide it, just letting it be, and discovering, in the letting, that imperfection has its own beauty. That a life with thumbprints is a life that was touched. Perhaps, right now, you can notice your hands. Are they closed? Are they holding something? A memory, a name, a sentence. Someone said that you have been gripping for years. You do not need to open them. You do not need to do anything. But if you can feel them, if you can feel the fingers, the palms, the small muscles that do the holding, then you are already closer to letting go than you think. Because noticing the grip is the first loosening, and loosening is its own kind of forgiveness. Turn your palms up, if you like. Just gently. Feel the air on the skin of your palms, cooler than the skin on the back of your hands, softer, more exposed. This is what open feels like. This is what rest feels like. Not the absence of pain, but the willingness to let the air touch where the coal has been. Let us stay here for a moment, in the openness, in the cooling. The night is deep now, and we have traveled far together. There is one more place I would like to take you. One more quiet corner of this evening's journey. It has to do with something very ordinary, something you might have overlooked. When you are ready, we will continue together. The mind replays because it is searching. It goes back to old rooms and old conversations and old versions of itself because it is looking for something it believes it lost or missed or failed to understand the first time around. It is searching for meaning, for the moment when things made sense, for the sentence that explains why things turned out the way they did. But what if meaning was never in the past at all? What if the mind has been looking in the wrong direction? The way someone searches the entire house for their glasses, growing more and more frantic, only to find them resting on top of their own head. What if meaning has been here the whole time? Not in the extraordinary moments, not in the turning points, not in the dramatic conversations that changed everything, but in the ordinary ones. In the kettle boiling, in the cat stretching, in the light moving slowly across the floor of a room where nothing important is happening. And that is exactly what makes it important. There is an old Zen saying that almost everyone has heard and almost no one has understood. It goes like this: before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Most people hear this and think it means that nothing changes. That enlightenment is disappointing. You still have to do the dishes, still have to take out the trash, still have to live your ordinary, unglamorous life. But that is not what it means. What it means is that everything changes, but the change is in the seeing, not in the seen. The wood is the same wood. The water is the same water. But the hands that hold them are awake now. The eyes that see them are open. And ordinary, truly ordinary, deeply ordinary, is the most extraordinary thing there is. Because ordinary is the only thing that is real. Everything else is a story the mind is telling about what should have been. There was a woman who discovered this in the quietest possible way. In a kitchen, on a morning, with a kettle and a cat, and nothing else. She had retired 4 months ago. She was 61, and for 33 years she had been an accountant. Not the exciting kind, not the kind who uncovers fraud or advises billionaires, the kind who sits in a small office, in a small building and makes sure the numbers add up. She had been good at it, not passionate, not fulfilled, not any of the words people use when they are describing work they love, but good, reliable, the kind of good that no one notices until it is gone. The mornings now were the hardest part, not hard in a painful way, hard in an empty way. For 33 years, the alarm had gone off at 6:15. She had showered, dressed, eaten toast with butter, always butter, never jam, and driven the same route to the same office and sat in the same chair. The routine had been so steady, so unquestioned, that she had never noticed it was holding her up. The way you never notice the walls of a house until someone takes them down. Now the alarm did not go off. No one needed her at the office. No one needed her anywhere, really. Her children were grown. Her husband had passed 2 years ago. And the friends she had were the kind you see at lunch once a month, not the kind who call at 7 in the morning to ask how you slept. She would wake on her own, usually around 6. The body's clock is harder to retire than the rest of you, and lie in bed for a while, watching the ceiling, and then get up and go to the kitchen. The kitchen was small and white and faced east. In the autumn, the sunrise came through the window, above the sink, in a low amber light that turned the countertops gold and made the steam from the kettle glow as if it were lit from inside. The floor was tile, cool underfoot in the morning, even with socks, and she could feel the cold seep through the fabric with each step, a small, insistent reminder that she was here, in this room, in this body, on this particular Tuesday. The cat, a grey tabby who had shown up 3 years ago and never left, would be waiting on the counter, which she had long ago stopped trying to prevent. It would watch her with the kind of patient attention that only cats and very old monks seem capable of. And when she filled the kettle, it would tilt its head slightly, as if the sound of water was worth considering. And here is where the replaying usually began. Standing at the counter, waiting for the water to boil, her mind would leave the kitchen. It would go back to the office, the spreadsheets, the colleagues, the rhythm of a day that had a point. It would replay the moment she had submitted her letter of retirement and wonder, for the 100th time, if she had done it too soon. It would replay conversations with her husband, the ones near the end, when she had wanted to say things that she did not say because there was always tomorrow until there wasn't. It would replay the years when the children were small and the house was loud and every minute was accounted for, and she had been exhausted and had not known, could not have known, that she would one day miss even the exhaustion. The kettle would boil, the steam would rise, the cat would yawn, and she would be somewhere else entirely. But one morning, an unremarkable morning, a morning that had no reason to be different from any other, something shifted. She was standing at the counter, watching the kettle, waiting for the click that meant the water was ready. And instead of leaving, her mind stayed. It stayed with the kettle. It watched the first wisps of steam curl upward from the spout. It watched the water inside begin to tremble, then shiver, then roll. It heard the sound change from a low hum to a rising whisper to a full, steady rumble that filled the small kitchen. The way an orchestra fills a concert hall. If the concert hall was 6 feet wide and smelled of dish soap and cat food, she poured the water into her cup. She watched the tea bag darken it, slowly, from the edges in, the way night comes to a lake. She lifted the cup and felt the heat against her palms, not painful, but present, insistent, alive. And she thought, not in words exactly, but in the way the body thinks, in sensation and weight and the sudden, quiet arrival of something that has been waiting. This is enough. This moment, this kettle, this steam, this warmth in my hands. This is not less than what I had before. It is different, but it is not less. The cat jumped down from the counter and walked to the window, where the morning light was making a rectangle of gold on the tile floor. It sat down in the rectangle exactly, as if the light had been placed there specifically for it. And the woman watched this too. The way the cat did not question the light, did not wonder if the light was meaningful, did not compare this morning's light to yesterday's, or worry about whether there would be light tomorrow. It simply sat in it, completely, entirely, without reservation. A Zen teacher once offered this instruction, which is perhaps the simplest instruction ever given. When walking, walk. When eating, eat. And the woman, standing in her kitchen with a cup of tea and a cat in a square of light, understood it for the first time, not as philosophy, not as a rule, but as a description of what was already happening, if she could only see it. When standing, stand. When holding a warm cup, hold a warm cup. When watching a cat, watch a cat. The meaning is not somewhere else. The meaning is in the watching. She began, after that morning, to notice things, small things. The way the light changed through the kitchen window as the seasons turned, from the low amber of autumn to the thin silver of winter to the warm gold of spring. The way the cat's fur caught the light differently at different times of day, turning from grey to pewter to something almost blue in the late afternoon. The way the tea tasted different, depending on whether she was paying attention. Richer, more complex, more itself, when she was actually tasting it instead of drinking it, while thinking about something else. She did not stop replaying entirely. The mind still went back sometimes, to the office, to her husband, to the years that felt more purposeful than these. But the trips became shorter. The past became less magnetic because the present, when she was actually in it, turned out to be full. Not full in the way the old days were full, loud, busy, demanding. Full in a quieter way. The way a single note, held long enough and listened to carefully enough, contains an entire symphony. Perhaps you have been searching too. Perhaps the replaying mind goes back because it believes the meaning was there. In the important years, in the busy years, in the years when everything was happening, and there was no time to wonder what any of it meant, and perhaps the meaning was there. But it is also here, in this breath, in the sound of this voice, in the weight of the blanket, and the darkness behind your eyelids, and the strange, quiet fact that you are alive right now, in this moment. And that is neither more nor less meaningful than any moment that came before it. There was a man who discovered this on a road he had walked 10,000 times. He had been a mail carrier for 30 years, the same route, every day, down Maple Street, across the park, up the hill to the houses on Elm, back around, past the school and the library and the small bakery that changed owners every 3 years, but always smelled the same. He knew every crack in the sidewalk, every loose fence post, every dog that would bark and every dog that would not. He could have walked the route with his eyes closed, and some days, in the winter dark, he nearly did. When he retired, he kept walking, not because he needed the exercise, though his doctor would have approved, but because his legs did not know how to stop. 30 years of the same steps at the same time had worn a groove so deep in his body's memory that the walking was no longer a choice. It was a rhythm, like breathing, like the tide. But something was different now. He was not carrying mail. His bag was empty, his hands were free, and for the first time in 3 decades, he was not in a hurry. There was no route to complete, no deadline to meet, no supervisor tracking his time. He was just walking. And because he was just walking, because the walking was no longer a means to an end, but an end in itself, he began to see. He saw the oak tree on the corner of Maple and 3rd. He had passed it every day for 30 years. And he could not have told you what it looked like. But now, without the mail, without the schedule, without the constant forward momentum of a man with somewhere to be, he stopped. And he looked up. The trunk was enormous, wider than his arm span, with bark that was deeply grooved, almost black in the creases, and paler where the squirrels had worn it smooth. The branches spread outward in a pattern that was chaotic and perfect at the same time, like a river delta seen from above, like the veins on the back of his own hand. And the leaves, it was October, so the leaves, each one was a slightly different shade, from deep green at the center to gold at the edges, and some had already begun their slow curl inward, preparing to let go. He stood under that tree for 10 minutes. He had never stood anywhere for 10 minutes in his life, and in those 10 minutes, he saw more than he had seen in 30 years of passing by. He saw the way. The light came through the leaves in coins of gold that moved on the ground. As the wind moved the branches above, he saw a spider's web stretched between 2 low branches, catching the morning light and turning it into a necklace of tiny, trembling diamonds. He heard a bird, just one, somewhere high in the crown of the tree, singing a phrase that repeated and repeated, each repetition the same, and each one slightly different. The way a jazz musician plays a melody. He had been rushing past this for 30 years, not because he did not care, but because the rushing was the job. The job was to move forward, and moving forward meant not stopping, and not stopping meant not seeing, and not seeing had become, without his noticing, the cost of his competence. Now, without the job, without the forward, without the purpose that had defined every morning for 3 decades, he was finally still. And the world, which had been there all along, waiting with infinite patience, finally had his attention. He walked the route every morning after that. the same route, the same streets, but each day he found something he had never noticed. A door that had been painted blue. When had that happened? A garden where someone was growing sunflowers so tall they leaned over the fence like curious neighbors. The sound of the bakery's exhaust fan, which made a low, warm hum that he could feel in his chest if he stood close enough. The way the schoolyard sounded at 8 in the morning. Not the shrieks and laughter of recess, but the earlier sound, the arrival sound. Car doors and backpacks and small voices saying goodbye. Ordinary, all of it ordinary. And all of it, for the first time, extraordinary. Not because it had changed, but because he had slowed down enough to see it. The extraordinary had been hiding inside the ordinary the whole time. The way a flame hides inside a match. Present, potential, waiting for the friction of attention to bring it to light. One morning, he stood beneath the oak tree again. The same tree, the same corner, and he looked up through the branches at the sky. It was November now. Most of the leaves were gone. The branches were bare and dark against a sky that was the particular pale blue of late autumn. Not the deep blue of summer or the grey of winter, but something in between, something tender, something that looked the way forgiveness feels. And through those bare branches, in that pale light, he saw the sky as if for the first time. Wide, open, holding nothing, needing nothing. Just there. He did not have a word for what he felt. He was not a man who used words for feelings. But if he had been, he might have said it felt like coming home. Not to a place, to a moment, to the realization that he had been home, all along, walking through it every day, carrying his mail and his schedule and his forward momentum, and never once stopping to notice that the door was open and the light was on, and someone, or something, had been waiting. The Zen teachers had a word that might seem strange, given everything we have talked about tonight. The word is sati, and in the old Pali language, it means mindfulness. But its root meaning is something unexpected. It means remembering, not remembering the past, remembering the present, remembering to come back, remembering that you left. It is the gentle tap on the shoulder that says, you were somewhere else just now, but you are here again, welcome back. And perhaps that is the deepest irony of the replaying mind. The mind replays because it is trying to remember, trying to hold on to something it thinks it lost. But the medicine for too much remembering turns out to be a different kind of remembering. Not remembering the past. Remembering now. Remembering this breath. Remembering this bed. Remembering that the ordinary moment you are lying in right now is not a waiting room between meaningful events. It is the event. Pema Chodron once said, I am neither doomed nor completely free, but I am creating my future with every word, every action, every thought. And tonight, the thought you are thinking right now, this one, the quiet one, the one that is simply listening, is creating something too. Not a future full of plans and worries and replayed conversations. A future full of this, of presence, of the sound of a voice telling stories in the dark, of the weight of a blanket and the coolness of a pillow, and the extraordinary, unrepeatable fact of being alive on this particular night, in this particular body, in this particular breath. Perhaps right now you can hear something, not this voice, something else, something in the room or beyond the room, or in the silence between sounds, the hum of a machine, the breath of someone sleeping nearby, the distant murmur of a world that is still moving, still turning, still carrying on its ordinary, extraordinary business while you rest. Listen to it, not to understand it, not to name it, just to hear it. The way the mail carrier heard the bird in the oak tree, not as information, but as music, not as something to analyze, but as something to receive. You are here, you are listening, and that is enough. It has always been enough. Let us rest with this for a moment. The night has grown deep, and we have traveled a long way together. We have sat with the replaying mind, and the river, and the words unsaid, and the body, and the stories, and the forgiveness, and now the ordinary moment that holds all of these inside it, like a cup holds tea. Quietly, without effort, without needing to be anything other than what it is. When you are ready, we will begin our journey home. We have come a long way tonight, you and I, and there are just a few more stories left. Quiet ones, slow ones, stories that are meant to carry you not to a new understanding, but to the edge of sleep, to the place where thinking ends and resting begins, to the place where the replaying mind at last sets down its work and lets the night do what the night was always meant to do. We have come to the end of our journey tonight, or perhaps not the end, perhaps just the place where the path becomes quiet enough that you no longer need someone to walk it with you. We have traveled far, you and I. We have sat with a woman at a kitchen window, replaying a sentence her daughter said, and we watched her learn that the replaying was not a flaw, but a form of love that had not yet found its rest. We have stood beside a river with a woman who discovered that thoughts, like leaves, will float away if you do not reach into the current to hold them. We have sat in a kitchen where the last words were about milk, and we learned that 41 years of love do not need a dramatic final sentence to be complete. We have lain awake at 2 in the morning and found that the body, the hands, the feet, the weight of the blanket is an anchor the mind cannot pull free. We have watched a nurse let go of a story she had carried for 20 years, and a judge close his journal and open his eyes. We have sat in a potter's workshop and watched forgiveness take the shape of an imperfect bowl, and we have walked a mail carrier's route and seen, for the first time, the oak tree on the corner that had been extraordinary all along. All of these people, all of these quiet, ordinary people in their quiet, ordinary lives were doing the same thing. They were learning to be where they are, not where the mind says they should be, not where the past insists they return to, just here, in a kitchen, on a porch, in a garden, at a bench, on a road, here, and you are here too. You have been here this whole time. Let us return for a moment to something we touched on at the very beginning of tonight. The replaying mind. We said early on that the mind that replays is not broken, and that is true. Truer perhaps than anything else we have said tonight. The mind replays because it cares, because somewhere inside the machinery of thought and memory and feeling, there is a part of you that refuses to let go of things that matter. And that refusal is not weakness. It is devotion. It is the mind saying, this meant something to me, and I am not ready to set it down. But devotion, when it does not know how to rest, becomes a weight, and the weight, carried long enough, becomes invisible. You forget you are carrying it, the way you forget you are wearing shoes until someone asks you to take them off. The replaying mind is not your enemy. It is your most loyal companion. And tonight, all we have been doing, all any of this has been, is showing that companion a chair, saying, you have been working so hard, you have been going back and going back and going back, and you are tired. Sit down, I will keep watch for a while. You can rest, and the body, let us return to the body too, because the body has been here through all of these stories, holding you, breathing you, keeping the heart beating, and the lungs moving, and the blood flowing, without once being asked, without once being thanked. The mind travels to the past and the future, and to rooms that no longer exist, but the body stays. It has always stayed. It is the most faithful thing you have ever owned. More faithful than memory, more faithful than hope, more faithful than the stories you tell yourself about who you are. The body does not tell stories. It simply lives, and it lives here, now, in this breath, in this weight, in this warmth. And when the mind finally tires of its travels and comes back, as it always does, eventually, the way a bird comes back to its branch, the body is waiting. It has never left. It never will. There is one more story I would like to tell you. It is the last story of the night, and it is the simplest. It is about a woman and a garden and a moon, and it is about what happens when you stop trying to sleep and simply let the night hold you. She was 76 years old. She lived alone in a house that had once held a family, a husband, 2 daughters, a dog that barked at everything and loved everyone. The husband had been gone for 8 years now. The daughters lived in other cities, other time zones, other chapters of their lives. The dog had been gone longest of all, and she still sometimes heard the click of its nails on the kitchen floor when the house was very quiet, which was most of the time. She could not sleep. This was not unusual. She could not sleep most nights. The mind would begin its work the moment she closed her eyes, and it would work with the tireless efficiency of something that does not know it is causing harm. It would show her things. Her husband's face in the hospital, the way the light had looked that last afternoon, coming through the blinds in thin, white lines that fell across his blanket like the bars of a cage made of light. Her younger daughter's voice on the phone last Sunday, saying, "I'm fine, Mum," in the particular tone that means, "I am not fine, but I do not want to worry you." The letter from the insurance company that she had not opened yet because she knew, somehow, that it contained a number that would make the future smaller. She lay in bed for an hour, then 2. The ceiling was dark. The clock on the nightstand glowed green. 11:17, then 11:43, then 12:02. She watched the numbers change with the patient resignation of someone who has learned that watching the clock does not make it move faster, but who watches anyway? Because the watching is something to do with the eyes, while the mind does its work. At 12:15, she got up, not with purpose, with the absence of resistance. The way you get up when you have stopped arguing with the wakefulness and decided to simply be awake. She put on the robe that hung on the back of the bedroom door. A cotton robe, faded from blue to something closer to sky, soft from years of washing. She slid her feet into the slippers that waited on the floor like 2 faithful animals, and she walked through the dark house, past the kitchen, past the empty dog bowl she had never been able to put away, to the back door. The garden at night was a different country. Everything she knew by daylight. The tomato stakes, the stone path, the wooden bench her husband had built the summer the younger daughter learned to walk. All of it was transformed by darkness into shapes that were familiar and strange at the same time. The tomato stakes were tall, thin shadows. The stone path was a pale ribbon winding through grass that was black instead of green. The bench was a low, solid presence, darker than the darkness around it. And above everything, the moon. It was nearly full, not quite, but close enough that its light was strong, casting shadows so sharp they looked painted on the ground. The light was silver and cool, the opposite of sunlight, and it made the garden look like a photograph of itself. The same shapes, the same arrangement, but drained of color and filled instead with a quiet, bluish luminescence that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. She walked to the bench. The grass was damp under her slippers, not wet, just cool with the dew that comes when the air gives up its warmth to the night. The bench was cool too. When she sat, she could feel the wood through the thin cotton of her robe, smooth, slightly rough at the edges where the weather had raised the grain. Her husband had sanded this bench by hand 23 years ago. She had watched him from the kitchen window, and she had thought at the time that it was an ordinary thing. A man sanding a bench, an afternoon, nothing worth remembering. But here she was, remembering it, and the memory for once did not hurt. It was just there, the way the moon was there, present, distant, beautiful, not asking anything of her. She sat. The crickets sang, a dense, layered chorus that rose and fell in waves, as if the garden itself were breathing. Somewhere beyond the fence, a frog called. A single, low note, repeated at intervals that were not quite regular, like a heartbeat with a slight arrhythmia. The air smelled of earth and cut grass, and the jasmine that grew along the back wall of the house. Its scent heavier at night, sweeter, as if the darkness drew something out of it that the sunlight could not reach. Her mind was still replaying. It showed her the hospital. It showed her the phone call. It showed her the letter on the kitchen counter. But something was different. The images were there, but they were not pulling her. They were not dragging her backward the way they usually did, with the gravitational force of unresolved feeling. They were just floating, drifting through her mind the way the clouds were drifting across the moon, covering it briefly, dimming the light for a moment, then moving on, letting the silver return. She did not decide to be at peace. Peace is not something you decide. It is something that arrives when you stop fighting the things that are keeping it away. And she had stopped fighting. Not because she was brave or wise or enlightened, because she was tired. Because the night was beautiful. Because the bench was solid and the crickets were singing. And the moon did not care about her worries. The moon just shone, and in the shining, it lit up everything equally. The garden and the shadows, the jasmine and the weeds, the bench and the woman sitting on it with her faded robe and her tired eyes and her mind full of unfinished things. She noticed her feet on the ground. The slippers had slipped off at some point. She did not remember when, and her bare feet were on the grass. The grass was cool and damp and alive against her skin. She could feel individual blades between her toes, and beneath the grass, the earth, solid, patient, holding everything up the way the earth always does, without complaint. without recognition, without rest. She noticed her hands in her lap, open, palms up. When had they opened? She did not remember opening them, but they were open, and the moonlight was falling on her palms, and her palms were cool and soft and empty, and the emptiness felt like a gift. Not the emptiness of loss, the emptiness of space, the emptiness of a bowl that has been poured out and is waiting. Not anxiously, not impatiently, just waiting. Available, ready for whatever comes next, or for nothing at all. She noticed her breath, slow, deep, slower than she expected. The body had been finding its own rhythm, while the mind had been busy with its replaying. And the rhythm the body had found was the rhythm of rest. Not sleep, not yet, but rest. The kind of rest that comes before sleep, the way silence comes before music. The pause, the settling, the last long exhale before the letting go. The moon moved, the shadows shifted, a cloud passed over, and the garden dimmed, and then the cloud moved on, and the silver returned. And everything was the same, and everything was new. She did not know how long she sat there. Time, in the garden, at night, under the moon, did not work the way it works in bedrooms, with green glowing clocks. Time, out here, was measured in breaths and cricket songs and the slow drift of clouds, and by that measure, she had been sitting for a very long time. And by that measure, no time had passed at all. She did not have a revelation. She did not forgive anyone, or understand anything, or arrive at any conclusion that would change her life tomorrow. She simply sat in her garden under the moon, with her bare feet on the grass and her hands open in her lap, and she was okay. Not happy exactly, not healed, but okay. In the way that the garden was okay. Imperfect, unfinished, full of things that needed tending, and things that had been let go, and things that were growing quietly in the dark without anyone watching. Okay, the way a life is okay, when you stop asking it to be something other than what it is. And that was enough. For tonight, that was enough. If this brought you some peace tonight, you are welcome to subscribe for more long-form audio like this, and share it with anyone who could use a slower night. Original commentary, stories, and script, written and produced by Moonlit Dharma. Thank you for joining us here at Moonlit Dharma. And now, as the night deepens, perhaps you notice that your body has already begun its journey toward rest. The shoulders, are they lower than they were an hour ago? Perhaps they have dropped, just slightly, the way a bird's wings fold when it has found its branch. You did not tell them to drop. They dropped on their own, because the body has been listening to these stories too, and it has heard what it needed to hear. The jaw. Notice the jaw. Is it clenched? Is it holding? Or has it softened? The teeth slightly apart. The tongue resting gently against the roof of the mouth. The muscles along the sides of the face releasing their quiet grip. The jaw holds more than you might think. It holds conversations. It holds words that were said and words that were not. And when it softens, it is letting all of those words rest too. The hands. Your hands have been with you through every story tonight. They have held a teacup with a retired teacher on a porch. They have turned the gears of a clock in an old shop. They have kneaded dough in a kitchen before dawn. They have opened palm up in the moonlight. And now they are where they are, resting wherever you have placed them. Feel their weight. Feel the warmth in them, or the coolness. Feel the way they are doing nothing at all, and how that nothing feels like something, like permission, like enough. The breath. You do not need to change it. You do not need to deepen it, or slow it, or control it in any way. The breath knows what it is doing. It has been doing this since the moment you were born. In, out, without a single instruction from you. It is the most faithful rhythm you have ever known. More faithful than any clock, more steady than any heart. And tonight, it is carrying you, not to a destination, just deeper into this moment, just further into rest. Feel the weight of your whole body now, how it presses into the mattress, how the mattress presses back. There is a conversation happening between your body and whatever is holding it. A conversation made entirely of weight and support, of gravity and give. You do not need to participate in this conversation. It is happening without you. It has been happening all along. You are being held. You have always been held. The way the earth holds the garden, the way the branch holds the bird, the way night holds the moon and the eyes. If they are still open, let them close. Not because you must, but because they are ready. They have seen enough for one day. They have watched the light change from morning to afternoon, to evening, to this darkness, this rest, this nowhere in particular that the eyes go when they finally stop looking. Let them close the way a flower closes at the end of the day. Not because it is dying, but because it is done. It will open again in the morning. But for now, the petals fold inward. The seeing stops, and the world behind the eyelids is dark and warm and completely safe. The night is very quiet now. The stories have been told. The old teachers and the old women and the old men have said what they came to say, and they have gone back to their kitchens and their workshops and their gardens and their porches, back to the places where they are most at home. And you are in the place where you are most at home too. This bed, this room, this breath. The replaying mind may still be there. It may still be reaching for a branch, turning over a conversation, drafting another version of a story that has already been told. That is fine. It is doing its best. It is doing what it has always done, but you do not need to follow it tonight. You can let it swing, and you can stay on your branch. The branch is solid. The branch has always been solid, and you are too tired to reach for anything else. There is nothing left to do. There is nothing left to figure out. There is nothing left to replay, or fix, or forgive, or understand. There is only this: a body on a bed, a breath in a chest, a mind that is finally, slowly, gently beginning to rest. Not because it was told to, not because it was forced, but because the stories were soft, and the night was long, and somewhere between the woman at the window, and the man in the clock shop, and the monkey on the branch, and the moon above the garden, the mind heard something it had been waiting to hear. It heard that it was allowed to stop, and so it stops, not all at once, slowly, the way snow stops. Not in a single moment, but flake by flake, each one deciding on its own that it has fallen far enough. The thoughts slow, the images fade, the replaying grows quieter, like a radio turned down and down and down, until it is just a murmur, and then a whisper, and then something less than a whisper, just the faintest hum of a mind at the very edge of sleep, doing its last small piece of work before the work is done. The night will hold you now, the way it has always held you, the way it holds the garden and the river and the oak tree on the corner, and the old woman on the bench, and the snow, and the moonlight, and the cricket song, and everything else that does not need to try to be at rest. You are safe. You are held. You are enough. And the night goes on.